welcome into Dragon Ball Super Dope. My name is Kyle. Thank you for checking this out. We have got a very special episode for you today. If you are a longtime listener to Super Dope, you'll know that there are certain content creators on YouTube that I definitely love and respect a lot. And the person that I'm talking with today is somebody that has inspired multiple talking points on our show, multiple tirades, rants, etc. We are talking with MistareFusion, the creator of the oft-referenced Dragon Ball Dissection on YouTube. How are you doing, Lance?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me on the show today.
Thank you so much for agreeing to come on. I have been asking for a bit, but schedules never really quite lined up. But, you know, I think we both find ourselves with a little bit of extra time on our hands due to this shelter-in-place order where we both live respectively. So
I bet you staged this whole quarantine just to free up my schedule, didn't you?
that was basically my plan. I mean, I've seen a lot of crazy conspiracy theories over the last couple of weeks, and I've yet to see anybody really perpetrate this one. I staged COVID-19 to be able to get MistareFusion on Super Dope.
There, he said it. He said it.
Yeah, there you go. It's confirmed. So I've talked about Dragon Ball Dissection multiple times on the show. What I really enjoy about your content and the way that I kind of tell my other Dragon Ball friends about your content is he is the content creator for the Dragon Ball nerd. Somebody who is deeply invested in the show like I am. I go to your channel to learn more about the content than I know already, and I've been a fan of the show for, I think, coming up on like 25 years. So that's honestly one of the highest compliments I feel like I could pay anybody, but regardless of how I feel about you, I'd still like for my audience to get to know you a little bit. And I like to sort of do some general getting to know you questions, and just kind of get to know you as a Dragon Ball fan a little bit and see like what your roots are within the fandom. So that said, how did you first find Dragon Ball and what age were you?
I was 12 years old. It was the fall of 1998, and I caught it on the reruns, on the rerun Toonami boom that a lot of kids in my generation got into it from. That would have been 22 years ago this September. Those first two seasons of Dragon Ball Z that Funimation had aired the previous 2 years on syndication that are now being rerun the following year on cable. And but then I also had my upstairs neighbor, who was my best friend at the time. He had seen this show or something like it a few years earlier. Like he recognized the characters, only they were younger, because he had seen those first 13 dubbed Dragon Ball episodes that had aired in 95.
Like on UPN and all those weird local affiliate stations. Yeah.
Yep. It was definitely syndicated as well. And so he was, filling me in on stuff that he'd seen before. And, even by then, it had only been 3 years for him, I guess. But the memories were a little bit faded. So he was like, oh, yeah, I remember that Piccolo guy. He was there, too. He was thinking of Pilaf.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Blue guy, green guy, same thing.
but as far as he was concerned, like those 13 episodes were the entire series. So I'd be asking like, oh, well, was this character there? He's like, no, I never saw that character before. And how about this guy? Nope, he wasn't there. So, there was definitely a large gap. And that was part of the fun of being into Dragon Ball back then, was everything was just a sort of minefield, this confusing jumble mishmash of information. Like you find the internet, and there are all these fan sites of people who were, into the series before Funimation got their hands on it, and so they had information from like fan subs they'd watched, and because I certainly I found Funimation's website, and like it listed all 53 episodes, and I thought that was the whole series.
Yeah.
Then suddenly I'm finding these websites that show like this character called Gotenks. Like who the heck is that? And finding out there was all this story, in between what my friend had said and what I was seeing on TV now. It was fun for the first couple of years to try to put all that stuff together.
Yeah, the mystery before the internet came along and made everything super accessible and ruined everything.
Well, it was the same internet that was, haphazardly putting the pieces together back then. So I wouldn't have known about it at all if it wasn't for the internet.
planetnamek.com. I know that you
Yep.
are involved with Kensenshu as well. I know that you've been on their podcast. Are you like involved with all of their podcasts, or how does that work?
No, this is excuse me. It's one of those things where you just sort of become friends with people over time. I'd been a big fan of theirs since I was 14 years old, and so I'd followed their sites, and eventually I joined the forums, and we sort of became kind of chummy. And on occasion, I was just so starstruck when Mike Labrie asked me onto the podcast for the first time, and I was too embarrassed to admit because I was in my early 20s and living in Nashville and very poor, and I didn't have my own home internet.
Oh.
I would have to go to the local Wendy's or something and latch onto their Wi-Fi to upload videos because I was really early on in my channel then. And so I was too embarrassed to admit that. So I was just trying to find some late night haunt to go to where the Wi-Fi might be strong enough and I had enough privacy to record this podcast. So I tried going out to a nearby park that had Wi-Fi, and it didn't work. It didn't work at all. I totally stood him up, and I was so mortified.
Oh my God, man. Talk
And
about some, like, that's taking your lumps of 101. Like, that's crazy stuff. Commitment.
It was the same. It was the same thing the second time too, because after my first jaunt to Nashville, I ended up moving back in with my mom for a few months, and that was when he asked me again, and she didn't have internet either. I was able to like leech off of the neighbor's Wi-Fi, but I was able to I was able to record with them once, but it was pretty touch and go. And so I was amazed that he kept inviting me back. But yeah, I did that. They asked me to write an art. They did a wonderful magazine for the 30th anniversary of Dragon Ball, and they asked several people they'd worked with before to do articles for them. And I was fairly known at the time, at least on the forums, for writing about Bardock. This is like not long after Dragon Ball Minus had come out.
I was gonna say, so 30 years puts us at about 2014, just after Dragon Ball Minus, and I know how you feel about Dragon Ball Minus.
Exactly. So I wrote that article about that, and a couple years later I got to sort of dig into my earlier writings to make my Dragon Ball Dissection videos on that. But certainly Kanzenshu, I can't. Since you bring up Kanzenshu, I would be criminal of me to let it pass, and I try to credit them as much as I can. Like, Dragon Ball Dissection would not be possible without the giant wealth of information that exists there that they've been compiling for over 20 years at this point, So, especially because, Dragon Ball is a foreign language series, and I have some Japanese background. I took some Japanese in college, but I'm not fluent. So just being able to find accurate information, and avoid the wastelands of the internet that I found in my youth. I can trust them. I can trust them more than almost any other source, really. So anytime I have a question, anytime I'm not sure about a translation, or I'm not sure if I have something right, I'll take it to those forums, or I'll ask them, and it's just that is the place to go for Dragon Ball information, bar none.
And I think it speaks to the commitment of our fandom in general. Like you said, 20 plus years, but like just the thorough research that all those people do for those threads. I mean, like you said, it's an archive, it's a wealth of information. It's been put together for the last 2 decades. And I think it sort of speaks to the idea that Dragon Ball strongly resonates with its audience, and for whatever reason. I mean, it can change from person to person. Getting back to the getting to know you questions, what would you feel as the thing that resonated most strongly with you in regard to Dragon Ball when you first found it?
I really liked serialized entertainment. As a kid, I'd really been into the old Batman serials from the 40s, which was the first time I'd really seen like a really big continuing storyline like that. Most children's entertainment is fairly episodic, and a lot of television up until the last few decades in general has been pretty episodic. They always like to be able to package things for syndication, so you can just hop on to anything and see any episode and be able to just jump right in. Early series of Star Trek were very much like that, where it was the Enterprise goes to a planet this week and then they wrap up the storyline and they move on. There's nothing wrong with that form of storytelling, but for me at 12 years old, it was it was very sort of unique to see a show that I'd come into, and it's like I certainly didn't catch it on the first day that it aired. I came in, maybe about a dozen episodes in or so, and so it's like I saw this guy with a halo running down this road above clouds, and I saw this little kid who kind of looked like him, wore similar clothes out in the wilderness, and I'd come back every afternoon, and the story just kept on going. I certainly loved once the fighting began. I really enjoyed that, and seeing these heroic characters make noble sacrifices, and I really latched onto that as well. But just the fact that I kept on coming back, and the story kept moving, and I was gone for a little while, and I came back, and I'd missed a whole bunch of episodes, and suddenly they were in space, and the kid character was dressed differently and had a different hairstyle, and it was just like I saw this as a series where where time actually passed, which you didn't see in cartoons a lot. So that's what's always stuck with me. And I know when we get to the Dragon Ball Super questions, because spoilers, I've read these questions in advance, we're gonna be coming back to that thesis right there.
I can't wait to get to those Dragon Ball Super questions now. Yeah, the serialized nature of it, I think, is something that, it just naturally compels you to want to come back and see what that next piece of that story is. And even in the case where you might miss, a chunk of it, so much has progressed in terms of the story. It's like, what the hell is going on here? What did I miss? It, it makes you want to go back and check it out and kind of fill yourself in. And I don't know. I think Dragon Ball is a series that rewards you for doing so in some cases. I think the mystery sometimes can be a little bit greater than actually learning about the way in which certain things come to be in the story. Like you mentioned Gotenks before, and it's like when I saw Gotenks on the back of a Super Battle Collection box when I was like 10 years old, I was like, I don't know who this little kid is. I don't know where he comes from. I don't know what he's about, but I can only imagine the crazy circumstances in which this character is going to come in. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to downplay the fusion dance. I'm using Gotenks as the example because you referenced him earlier, but sometimes when you get to the payoff of what those characters end up being, Broly's a good example. He's another one on the Super Battle Collection box that I was like, who's this big, ripply, mean-looking dude? And then I got to the movie, I'm like, oh, all right. And we'll talk about Broly in a little bit deeper.
Well, it's also like I was saying in the, when you asked me the first question, like especially going back to that serialized nature, when I got online and found that there were all these stories that came before, like that just blew my mind. The Goku was a kid at some point, and he met all these people, and there are all these tournaments and everything. Like that just expanded the world so much. To even have a character. It's funny how controversial it was at the time, but it's like the fact that the main character that I'd known had a past. That he was able to start at one age and then grow. Like that was amazing to me. I wanted to learn. I was most excited about the stuff that came before, even more so than I was about the stuff that came later on. I wanted to go back and find out what that other stuff was. So that's in terms of the expansiveness of a timeline and of this story, definitely finding out that there were all these stories before that is really what cemented, like, oh my god, this is amazing.
That's a really interesting point. Now that we've said it like that, localization powers that be, Funimation, Ocean Studios, whomever, the decision to they did the first 13 episodes and said, hey, this isn't really hitting where we expected. We know that Dragon Ball Z is a huge hit in Japan. Let's just fast forward to Dragon Ball Z. That decision, in retrospect, may have served the series catching on with people like you and I who wanted to dive deeper into like the lore and where these stories originated from by fast forwarding, 150 episodes or so. That's an interesting way to think about it. I think how much of the appeal of Dragon Ball comes from just wanting to understand where everything comes from, and a series that probably over 600 episodes at this point, if you count all 4 series, not counting Kai.
Yeah, probably. I think somewhere in that area.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but but Funimation has definitely gotten a lot of mileage out of labeling things as lost episodes. So as marketing tactics. So yeah,
That's
yeah. It's certainly it's a supply and demand type of scenario where it's you create demand for something by restricting the supply.
Yeah, and back in the day when we were watching those localizations, you do a great job in Dragon Ball Dissection of breaking down like what Funimation had to do in terms of like the censorship and having to take a few episodes and kind of like combine them together and what official episode counts kind of actually are. Um it's something that I definitely wasn't hip to or even really thought about at all or was on my radar when I was a kid, but hearing it now as an adult who, has watched Dragon Ball Super go through the animation struggles, I guess, the production struggles that they've had while they were airing live. It's interesting for me to get some perspective on some of the same sort of struggles Dragon Ball Z had, 20, 30 years previous. That said, what do you think, or what would you say is your favorite series among all of the Dragon Ball series?
Well, if we're talking about the manga, that's really easy. It's Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball is my favorite series of Dragon Ball.
That's a cheat though, because that encapsulates Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. We're talking about the anime series specifically.
No, you didn't. You didn't say that though.
Anime series specifically. I've amended the question.
All right. Dragon Ball.
All right, cool. I agree with you. Any reason in particular that makes you so firm in that choice?
And well, to be fair, I guess as soon as I said that, I immediately felt a little twinge of guilt for leaving Dragon Ball Z, quote unquote, out of it, because there's so much that I love. It's certainly so much I'm nostalgic for, because that was my first. But I don't know. I just really sort of connected with the more mystical vibe of that era of Dragon Ball storytelling. I really cared for the characters then. I just felt like as I've said in some of my Frieza arc episodes, I feel like eventually the scale and the scope gets a little too big to really internalize as a viewer. And so I really just more emotionally connected to a lot of the stuff that happened earlier on, when things were a bit smaller and a bit easier to digest. When blowing up a city was, the peak of, yeah, you can understand that kind of thing. You can understand the more intimate scale conflicts happening, I think.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, at a certain point, it just gets too big for you to really be able to empathize with or rationalize on a human level. Talk about universal galactic scale kind of stuff, destruction, and it's like, me as a human, I can't fathom that. I can't imagine what it'd be like if my street blew up.
Yeah, it's like you definitely get to the point, I feel like, in the Buu arc especially, where it's like you kill off about half the cast at once, and it's treated as sort of like they're whatever. Whereas like these things used to at least be treated as as a big deal. Even if you had Dragon Balls to revive them, there was always a sort of they were heavy dramatic moments that mattered. But like you do it enough times, and then like the scale becomes, we kill literally every person on the planet. Then it's like suddenly those 15 people, they just didn't really carry that much weight anymore, and it was kind of disappointing.
Yeah, it definitely reduces the sting when you've seen Krillin bite it for the 4th or 5th time. In terms of, and I think I know the answer to this one, but to be fair, I do feel like you have a very confusing rating system for your arcs on Dragon Ball Dissection. So you've just started the Majin Buu arc, and you've done the first 2 episodes of it. It's mainly focused on the Great Saiyaman and Gohan, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, because I do have a specific question that I think is oft talked about in the Dragon Ball world about Gohan, kind of becoming that main character for all of 2.5 minutes. But before we get to that part of it, because you've done so many of the arcs to this point, I've saw your rating system as of today, and it goes from 10 to 1. and I think 10 is the Red Ribbon arc, but I think 10 means that's your top favorite arc. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, because to be fair, it's partly my fault because I sort of gave it as a misnomer early on. I've really quickly course corrected these. It's not a ranking. It's not a rating. They're scores.
Okay.
You know, it's a scoring system from 1 to 10 because there are 10 total Dragon Ball story arcs, and they're not like an objective quality of good and bad. They're all scored on a curve basically, since there are 10 scores and 10 arcs. Each arc gets its own, gets a score by itself basically. It gets one of those 10 numbers, and once each score has been taken, it can't be taken by any of the other arcs basically.
Yeah, and that's the part that confuses me is once the number is assigned. Like, I mean, you could assign 10 to the Red Ribbon arc, but maybe you think another one's a 10. Maybe you think it's equally as good. But 10's already picked, so you got to go to 9. I don't know. The rating system confused me.
I definitely wrote out all of my scores before I even did the first episode of Dragon Ball Dissection.
Oh wow,
8 years ago. Yeah, it was because if you go back to both the end of the Piccolo arc and the end of the Cell arc, you'll see that's like the one time where I said that I had changed my mind about something. That I'd initially scored those arcs in reverse, and then I ended up flipping. When I got to the Piccolo arc, I decided to flip them from what I had originally written down. So yeah, assigning all the scores and the order before I started was essential, so I would never get in that problem of except for this one glaring exception, I wouldn't get to have that problem of I've already assigned the 10. So it wasn't like a haphazard type of thing. It was basically just I wrote down the first story arc, and then I wrote down the second one. I'm like, okay, is the second one better or worse than this one? And I would put it either above or below it, and then I keep going until all 10 story arcs were in a nice ordered list, and that's the scores that they got.
Got it. Now that you've described it in that fashion, that makes a little bit more sense to me. So that said,
it functions pretty similar to a ranking, I guess you could say. But yeah, they are considered scores.
So does that mean Red Ribbon's your favorite?
For all intents and purposes, I guess you could say that. I did try to avoid scoring them based on just, this is my favorite, but tried to score them based on
more objectively.
The level of quality. Yeah, like the level of quality I thought they had achieved. And again, 10 does not mean perfect, and 1 does not mean worthless. 1 simply means that of all the Dragon Ball story arcs, I think the other 9 are better than it. So in terms of favorite, and also the other thing to keep in mind is that I am scoring these arcs as whole entities, because there are certainly things in certain arcs that I think are really good, and certain other things I think are really bad. It's sort of how it all jumbles together as a cohesive story. There are certain things, because as you know, if you watch the series, the only score left is 1 right now, which is obviously going to go to the Majin Buu arc, which means I think that it is the weakest story arc in Dragon Ball. But that said, there are moments in the Majin Buu arc that are some of my favorite in the entire franchise. It's just the way that those all coalesce into a singular story is sort of lacking. But in those like individualized moments, it's like that was a really great idea, and that worked really well. But it's just like it's surrounded by other things that don't really gel really well.
So I think the main or the obvious example, at least in my brain, would be the fusion dance as a bright spot in the Buu arc for me. What do you feel like are some of the bright spots in the Buu arc? I'm curious.
Well, that's the problem though, is I haven't put those episodes out yet. So that's
what I'm trying to get some exclusive content, man.
Really, really terrible if I came on here after 8 years of carefully guarding my opinions on things until I got to them, to completely spoil my own videos.
I just want the one hint. I just want the one hint. It's okay. It's okay.
Well, I can definitely say it's like, for example, because I've already covered this already. I think I love the Great Saiyaman stuff.
Me too. He gets shit on so much, and I hate it.
But as I've said in the videos, the way that it's actually executed is, or at least the way that it's bounced around is pretty narratively terrible, you know?
Well, yeah, I think you nail it with one line in The Great Saiyaman is they spend a lot of time setting up the character and they essentially just abandon the use of the character almost right away. It makes almost
Yeah, it's
no
more
sense.
time. It's more time spent setting the character up than it actually is using him. So it's so unbalanced.
Yeah, it does. I feel like they could have gotten a lot more mileage. I think honestly, I didn't put this one in the getting to know you questions, which by the way we're still in. But I almost asked which is your favorite movie. If I had to bet, you'd pick between the first three movies. But one of my soft spots for the movies is movie 13, Dragon Fist Explosion versus Hirudegarn, and I think a lot of that sentimentality comes from how much the Great Saiyaman, both of them, are utilized in the few opening scenes. I love getting some of that additional Saiyaman action.
Oh yeah, I love that opening to that movie. Although I still wish he'd gone back to the helmet at that point, but especially because she has a helmet, you know, it's like that they would, you know,
Exactly.
they would complement each other better.
It's just like they didn't get the memo on wanting to match their Saiyaman uniforms. What is your favorite opening song for the series?
Oh, that is tough because there are so many that I do like. And that's something that's fun that ties into my nostalgia too, because going to those you know, late 90s fan sites,
Oh,
you know,
okay. So
it,
I don't know if you would consider doing an English opening song. You wouldn't do that. I don't think you would do that. But I was gonna say if it helps you narrow it
I was
down,
like you think I
Japanese.
I was like you think I'd pick Rock the Dragon or something.
I mean, you said nostalgia, and I get a little nostalgic for that song too, and I'm a bit of
Oh
a
yeah, no,
sub
I
snob.
like, well, especially because that was a song you don't. If you watched it on Toonami, since Toonami never showed except for Real Adventures of Johnny Quest, they always did it there. But it's like normally Toonami would cut out the openings for their shows and put in their own custom openings. So it's like you'd only ever hear the theme song in the end credits. So when they played the Toonami movies and they actually played the opening, you know, there for the first time, I did, you know, I did find it catchy at the time. But no. What I was getting at is that a lot of those fan sites, because again, the fan sites that came up at the time, those were all from the Japanese fans. You know, like, you know, people there weren't a lot of, you know, Funimation dub fans at the time. You know, it's funny to think that they're the majority now when things weren't like that in the 90s. But no, it's like, you know, so it's like back then all those primitive website tropes, and one of them was, you know, to autoplay midis of songs on your web pages, you know.
I remember this
You know,
from my my Angel Fire pages. Yep.
mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure the very first actual Dragon Ball theme song that I heard in MIDI form was We Were Angels.
Oh, I love that song so much.
But like, you know, there were so many of them that I heard this way. I didn't know what they were used for. All I knew was like a sort of, you know, a truncated name, because like the file name you'd see in the loading bar when it would load the page for a split second. So I was like, okay, this is Angels or something, and this is a Chala something, and this is Blue. I loved Blue Velvet.
I love Blue Velvet too.
The third Dragon Ball GT
favorite
closing
songs for GT.
I would go to the websites and go to the specific pages on those websites just to sit there and listen to the songs, you know?
In MIDI form back in the day.
Yeah, in MIDI. I can't. I don't even know how long it was before I actually heard the real songs. You know, again, this was the 90s. It's hard to, you know, this is like even before Napster and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So
Napster was my gateway into Dragon Ball music. In the 6th grade, I downloaded all of those songs and played them on repeat ad nauseum. All right, but opening songs. We're talking Makufushigi Adventure, Chala, Head
okay.
Chala, Power We Got a Power, Don Don. I guess we can count Super too if you would even consider those.
I'd say either Makufushigi or Chala Head Chala.
Okay. I'm inclined to go Don Don every time. That song is just in my soul for some reason.
Oh, I love that one. I think that was one that I didn't encounter until a little bit later, like after I already sort of gotten a repertoire of MIDI songs, and suddenly I found this one that was just labeled as Don Don, and I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. You know, to this day, I might like the songs more in MIDI than I do the actual real songs. And I feel like I'm dragging all these answers out, but there's just so many fun stories to go with them, you know?
No, man, roll with it. So I know that I didn't throw this one in the outline, but I did ask this one to our friend Masako X, because I thought he did a cover in the Team 4-Star episode 60 thing of Spirit versus Spirit, but it turns out it wasn't him. But anyway, that question took a right turn into what's his favorite Kageyama song. So I feel like I need to ask that to you too. What's your favorite Hironobu Kageyama song or Kageyama Hironobu song? There's a lot. But Dragon Ball specific, if that helps you. I saw somebody posted something the other day. It's like all the songs that Kageyama's done from like 84 through 1999 or something. And it's like 22 minutes of just kick-ass 90-second anime openings.
Good lord. I don't know, like his vocals for Chala Head Chala are so infectious. But obviously that's a pretty obvious answer, obviously obvious. But so I don't know, like there were so many of those like movie ending themes. Most of them just didn't stick with me at all. A lot of them seem kind of generic to me. But I see your face.
Do you like Burning Fight?
I do like Burning Fight, especially because it's just I always heard Barney Fife instead. I grew up watching 60s television. But no, I always had a soft spot for the one I don't even know the name of it actually, but it's the one that's in movie 9, DBZ movie 9.
Is that the second Broly movie?
No, that's the BoJack movie.
Oh, okay. I don't know which one that is.
It's called Rising High.
Oh, I do know that. Dun 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 dun.
Yep, that's the one.
I love that song. Rising high, rising high. Yeah, it's a great tune. Good pick. Cool.
That one is so catchy. It's like some of them feel kind of generic to me, but that one always was like, yeah, I like that one. That one always stuck with me.
Deep cut. Good pick. So I guess we should probably move over into Dragon Ball Dissection. You've been doing it for 8 years. That's like a hell of a commitment. I haven't been doing Super Dope for almost 3 years now. I've been doing Super Dope. The idea of me.
Has it been that long already? Wow.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it. I started doing the math today. Not that it's hard math to do, but I'm like, man, we did Dragon Ball Super as a podcast while Dragon Ball was on the air for about 7 months. But we found like a cool little niche audience, and I like the people that like our show and they like the content we put out, so we continue to do it. But we started to spread it out a little bit because obviously Dragon Ball content is scarce. But we did My Hero Academia season 4. I think, have you ever watched the reason I ask is because I know you've done a good portion of Super Sentai videos for your channel as well. Did you ever watch the Spider-Man series from 1978?
I've seen a couple clips of it. I've never actually really delved into it.
It's pretty bad, and bad in a really fun way. I think we're going to start doing Spider-Man Sundays, I think is what I'm tentatively calling it, but we're going to go through that series episode by episode. That's a shit show. Anyway, that's the kind of hard up luck that I've got in terms of seeking out content and episode review stuff. Dragon Ball to Spider-Man. Anyway, 8 years is a long time to commit to doing Dragon Ball Dissection. What was the idea or what was the impetus to make you want to start this series in the first place?
It has been a long time. I've been doing my channel for 11 years this month. And both of those, 8 years and 11 years, it's longer than I ever spent in a single home, longer than I spent in a school, longer than any relationship I've ever destroyed. So yeah, it's definitely a big commitment. But going back to those doomed podcast attempts in Nashville, that's pretty much when I was first thinking of getting the ideas of putting something like Dragon Ball Dissection together, because at that point I've been doing my channel for a little over a year, and I had just been working on those Super Sentai videos you just mentioned, which are still like some of the most highest viewed videos on my channel after all this time. But I just hit my first 100 subscribers. But my first video that ever really made any kind of impact was my Dragon Box Volume 1 review that I did when that first came out. And so it was like if I went to my YouTube analytics, which wasn't called analytics back then, I forget what it was called back then. But if I went to that and looked at my overall viewer graph for the entire history of my channel, that was like the first big, first time that line just sort of spiked. That spike looks really tiny now, thankfully, compared to things that have happened in the past 10 years since then. But that was a huge spike for me at the time. And definitely of all the fandoms that I've been in, there's certainly things that I was in younger than when I was 12, to be sure, but nothing that I've really sort of stayed invested in as much as Dragon Ball. So being into Dragon Ball at that point for about 12 years, I had managed to develop a lot of opinions on it somehow.
Yeah.
And certainly having joined the Kanzenshuu forums earlier, which at the time with the Daizenshuu EX forums, several months earlier, I finally sort of gotten people to talk Dragon Ball with, because it's really funny. I tend to indulge in fandom in a very sort of solo, secluded kind of way, and I never really got involved with any kind of Dragon Ball fandom. It was especially hard for Dragon Ball because after the year 2000, the Dragon Ball that I was a fan of was not the same Dragon Ball that all of my friends in school were fans of. So it's like I'd come, because I got converted. After
I so relate to what you just said.
In the summer of after 8th grade, I really, we got a new computer with better internet. I found all these awesome sites like Planetnomic and DBZ Uncensored, started buying fan subs. I came back into high school and all my friends hated me because I came, it's like, the Cell arc was airing, and they had that terrible flashback to the Red Ribbon Army stuff where they had the entire story completely wrong, and suddenly I knew all this stuff because I'd done all this research over the summer, and I was so angry. And so, my friends and I'd be having our conversations, and it was just me saying, oh, this was wrong, and this was terrible, and this is the way it's supposed to be. And I was probably pretty obnoxious about it too, but it's like, we were definitely, teenage kids fighting over this, this stuff. So eventually it just sort of became like, I realized that it wasn't something that I really socialized with. It's like, it was just something I didn't really have anybody who I could relate to in my real life.
And what happens when that happens? You turn to the internet.
Exactly. So it really wasn't until 2009, the end of 2009, when I joined the Kanzenshuu boards. Finally, I don't know why it took me so long. I just wasn't much of a forum person. Where it's like, okay, this is my tribe in a sense. These people I can talk Dragon Ball with. And so I through that, I sort of managed to articulate a lot of things I had feelings I had about Dragon Ball. I didn't really see a lot of content out there, and plus, when I was that awkward teenager in the early 2000s, it was like I took web design in high school, a semester of it, just so I could like make my own Dragon Ball webpage, which I never did. but I had like these dreams, especially because this was like the pre bilingual DVDs. You couldn't, you had to get these fan subs, so I just had like this dream that, because I loved the site DBZ Uncensored, that's what sort of helped convert me, and I just sort of had this dream that like Chris Saros would step down and like choose me as his successor and hand me this giant box of tapes he'd recorded off the international channel, and I finally get to see, all of Japanese Dragon Ball. So it sort of seemed like at that point, I already had a YouTube channel. Wasn't quite the same as a web page, but that was like the 21st century equivalent of having a fan page is having a YouTube channel. So
yeah.
So I just remember like taking these long walks at night while I was like scripting all the Super Sentai videos. As I was sort of brainstorming those, I was thinking about all this Dragon Ball stuff too. It's like, oh, what would I say about about what happens to Yamcha in the Cell arc, and what would I, all these different ideas, and like that example, I didn't get to that for like the next 6 years or so, so it was definitely, stuff I sort of like tucked away in a box for a very long time. I guess I'm very patient in that regard, but yeah, it just seemed like it wasn't something that anybody else was really doing in an in-depth way, and I guess I can't really understate my sources of inspiration. It was like I was making these Super Sentai videos at the same time that this a reviewer named Linkara was making his History of Power Rangers videos, and that was sort of what inspired me to make a Super Sentai type thing. Was like, that sort of re-sparked my childhood interest in Power Rangers. But if you look at them, Dragon Ball Dissection is structured kind of similarly to History of Power Rangers. And then I found out that he had taken his style from a reviewer named SF Debris, who did Star Trek reviews. And I'm a huge Star Trek fan, so I started watching his reviews. And I really definitely borrowed sort of the format from that too. I borrowed the scoring system from SF Debris, because there were 10 Star Trek movies, and he had a 1 through 10 score of the original 10 at the time before the reboot movie. And so it was like a 1 through 10 scoring system, and each one got, it was all graded, scored on a curve kind of thing. So I was like, I can take, that and sort of do my own twist on it. And then that was sort of how, and doing each arc with its own, sort of its own unique opening, that came from SF Debris, because each Star Trek series, of course, this is all more episodic, so he's able to sort of just jump around from episode to episode and series to series, but each individual Star Trek series had its own opening, so I sort of took that idea from that. So it all just sort of came, like, because I was sort of moving away from that kind of caustic, angry reviewer that was in vogue at the time, that sort of nostalgia critic, spoony experiment, sort of like reviews as comedy skits kind of thing, which I don't have any. I'm not saying I don't. I still do that on occasion. My latest Batman review is still kind of in that style. But I was sort of seeing you could do more analytical, serious content as well, and get off the ground with that. And I vastly underestimated the kind of commitment that entailed, really. So I just figured it would be like, just a little series I would do on my channel among other things. I really didn't think I'd be doing it 8 years later, to be sure. I'm glad I still am, but especially since it's become such a popular segment on my channel. But I definitely did not understand what I was getting into when I figured it'd be like, I get this done within a year or so,
Yeah, no such luck. The demand is there, and you've got the goods. So is it once a month you do Dragon Ball Dissection?
There's no real set, because I try to put out a new MistareFusion video every 2 weeks. Usually comes out on Mondays. And sometimes it's a Dragon Ball Dissection video, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes, especially for a while, I was trying to do like a Dragon Ball Dissection video, and then like a slightly easier, less time-consuming video to sort of keep me from burning out and running out of time. It's kind of thing.
A lot of edits for your Dragon Ball Dissection videos.
Yeah. So it did kind of end up, I guess, kind of averaging out to about once a month, because of the fact that it was sort of alternating like that in every 2 weeks. But there were some times, on occasion it would be, 2 Dragon Ball Dissections in a row, kind of like what just happened with the last 2 episodes. And then, of course, there's, I don't know what masochistic streak came over me in 2013 to decide, I'm gonna celebrate Christmas by doing a month-long Dragon Ball Dissection marathon. now I'm sort of stuck in it now, and I can't not do it because it's become too big of a deal. It was bad enough the first year when it was 4 videos. Then suddenly it was like, this video is too long. I'll split it into 2 parts, and that happened 2 years in a row. So after that, it was like, I guess I should just do 5 videos now.
So, I mean, it's a lot of content to have to cover. I mean, primarily you're doing just the manga, but you also do break off and do Dragon Ball Dissection television specific. You also do the movies, but having to cover so much content and being able to consistently deliver high quality analysis and input on the series that's been around for so long, when I feel like everything's been said about it, but you consistently find new and interesting things to say about it. When you sit down to write a Dragon Ball Dissection script, do you have like any specific rules or like goals in mind in terms of like how you intend to inform the people who watch your videos? What's that thought process look like?
Um, it's definitely evolved over time because I'm fairly certain, I'm almost entirely certain, like when I did the first story arc, it was just one script. It was one script, and then I cut it into three parts, and so the whole thing was sort of done all at once. And then it was just separated into bite-size formats. But obviously, as the arcs have gotten longer and my videos have gotten more detailed, it's just
13-part Frieza arc. I know.
yeah, 18-part Cell arc.
Oof.
Yeah. The first story arc I covered in 3 episodes. Same thing with the second one, and same thing with the fourth one. But it's never been that short again, really. So yeah, it would take me months to just sit down and write out the entire arc from start to finish. So I definitely do write them episode by episode now. And it certainly has become more challenging to stay structured in that format as the videos get longer and the number of parts get longer, and it's like it could take me a year and a half. I think it was like about a year and a half. No, it was like a year and 9 or 10 months to cover the Cell arc.
Well, yeah, I think you said it in one of the Saiyaman videos. You focused a lot in the beginning of Cell, and as you get toward the end, it kind of becomes a little bit more broad. But you focused a lot on the upfront stuff, which kind of drags it out a little bit. Not drags it out. That's the wrong term. Elongates it a little bit.
Yeah, that's partly because I think I said that in the I'm pretty sure it was a Saiyan arc, as you said. Where it's more just because of the structure of the story, where it's like once you get into the fighting. It's if I'm not going to say there isn't a lot that could be mined there. I'm sure somebody who has a keener eye and larger interest in the choreography of martial arts, fictional martial arts combat, could probably make really detailed videos about that. I do focus pretty heavily on story characterization though. So obviously once you get to the fighting, it's not me giving like the Howard Cosell play-by-play of every single move that happens. It's just how does this tell the story. So it does tend to go a little faster at that point. But yeah, when you spend a year and a half working on the same story arc, it's really hard not to either repeat yourself or forget, like you had this amazing point you wanted to make, but you're saving it for later, and then you forget about it a year down the road, kind of thing. So I definitely, in the past several years, have tried to keep things as organized as possible, where I have just voluminous notes of things. If I have an idea, I'll write it down, so I won't. It's like, I'm going to use this when I get to this chapter. There's like 50 chapters from now, kind of thing, and I'm totally going to forget it, so I'll write it down. It's basically just, and especially like in the past few years, I've become more, I've become a little less chronology structured and a little more topic structured. So it's like I get so many times people are like, well, why didn't you mention this? And it's like, well, because I have nothing to say about it right now. But once we get a little bit later in, and this sort of becomes a larger growing motif or a theme, I'm going to cover the whole theme at once, and it doesn't really flow well in a script to say, oh, and then this thing happened, and then that thing happened. It's like if you don't have a reason to talk about something, then it's don't bother to write it in. I love. Again, to go back to my hero SF Debris, he had this thing he said in a video once. It's called I have this disease called you forgotism, where it's like every time I put out a video, it's like I hear this little voice in my head saying, if you don't put it in the review, people will think you forgot. Yeah. So it's always that sort of curse where you're trying to structure things as professionally as possible, but you know that people have certain expectations, and after you've been doing this for enough years, you can kind of read the room, and and so it's I almost try to sort of head things off at the pass now, where I make little jokes. I feel like what was it? I was doing a Cell arc video last year where I mentioned that it's during the days of peace before the Cell games, and Goku's driving his family around in a car, And so I made a comment about how, I guess Goku learned to drive at some point, because I'm covering specifically the manga, and I do not, use stuff from other sources in my analysis of the manga. But I know Dragon Ball fans enough to know that's a popular enough episode that someone's gonna go, well, it was actually in the TV series. He learned to drive in this episode, And it's like, yeah, I know that. I've seen the show. I'm just not covering that right now. So I had to make a sort of little joke at that expense, going, and don't you ever say this, and it's overrated anyway. I made a little quip at its expense, kind of thing. So I try to head these things off at the pass, but it's I think you sort of have to approach these scripts like you would for as unfun as it sounds, like any kind of research paper or anything, where it's you do multiple drafts. You write a draft, and then you come back to it a couple days later, and then you look at it again and go, okay, I could do this better. A lot of time, sometimes I have scripts that just flow out really easily, where I know exactly what I want to say. Other times it's like I'm just banging out stuff on the keyboard as it comes into my head, and part of it, I'm like, this is crap. I know this is crap, but I have to make it to the end of this draft, because then I can go back to it and see what I have, and then it's always the structure. It's always when things don't flow right. That's when I can tell, where it's like, oh, this would make much more sense if I put it in earlier with this. This flows better. It's all about finding a flow, and I think if you do it enough times, then you start to see where things look awkward, and once you have that really painful first draft and you have everything out on the page, then it's like you can see the bigger picture and be able to organize things the way you want them to be.
Gee, Lance, what's a first draft? I just want to watch Dragon Ball Heroes and have a webcam on my face so I can react and upload that as content. No, I so appreciate the thoughtful research that goes into, because like I said, I don't know. I'll say it. I'm a little bit of a snob when it comes to Dragon Ball content. And I'm not trying to take any, pot shots at like people who do live reaction videos, but that, in my opinion, is very low quality content. Like literally anybody can do that if you own a webcam, whether you're invested in the series or not. To be able to look at Dragon Ball with such an analytical eye is not just something that you can decide to do. And I don't know, I feel like in the last few years specifically, maybe it's because I've got more of a finger on the pulse of what we all do as content creators, like Dragon Ball YouTube and Dragon Ball podcasts, because that's the world, and there are several of us, weirdly. Two very different animals, but like being able to create quality content for both, one or the other, I feel requires the kind of level of research that you're talking about here. So I don't know, no pot shots at reactors, but I appreciate the more thoughtful, scripted, sometimes drafted over 2 or 3 different versions content. I prefer that sort of deal as opposed to Dragon Ball Heroes live reaction episode 22. I think 22 dropped today. Have you watched it? Are you watching that mess of a thing?
Heroes? I have not seen any of Heroes. I
You've
have
not
my
watched
limits.
any of it?
I have my limits, all right?
It's so bad it's fun, though. Come on.
I don't know. It just, it really, as I was saying earlier, it's, while I like, I like good combat that can get me emotionally invested, but, and to be fair, I can't really give an informed opinion on the series because I haven't seen it. So I could be totally off base here. But I sort of get the impression that like Dragon Ball Heroes has really sort of become that distilled, this is us getting our action figures together and losing all pretense and just sort of having them fight each other. And honestly, if there's nothing for me to emotionally connect to with the characters or the plot, if it's just, it honestly surprised me. The first time I heard somebody say, you watch Dragon Ball for the story, it literally did it really did shock me to have somebody tell me that. Or to ask me that. To me, everything is about the story. I've never been a person who can just subsist on fighting or action or special effects or hype. There's certainly a novelty to it, But if it's just that, I zone out. And it was just like, I'm sorry, but watching the Broly movie in theaters last year, I was having a good time. Then the fighting started, and it was just like 50 minutes of nothing but that, and I'm just like struggling to pay attention. I was like, okay, they're fighting still. I'm getting bored. Can we go back to the scenes where your Chilai and Broly and Limo are talking about his pet bear thing? You know,
Yeah.
I miss that.
I've had that exact same moment where somebody kind of busted my chops about nitpicking at a Dragon Ball story. Like before we ever had a podcast, I was talking with my dad and his best friend, who my dad's fairly young in regards to what my age is, but they're the ones who kind of showed me the way into Dragon Ball. But I've been keeping up with Super. They had not been keeping up with Super. My uncle Julius is a huge Future Trunks fan. And I was like, yo, Trunks is back. This is what we've been waiting for. We're so excited. However, the end of this arc just ended the way it ended. And I'm kind of mad. And they just took what I felt was a pretty solid arc in terms of setup and just pissed it all away. And they looked at me and they're like, dude, it's fucking Dragon Ball. Like, what are you upset about? Are you really going to try to nitpick the story of Dragon Ball? I'm like, yeah, they could have done it better. It didn't make as much sense as it could have.
Well, first off, I don't want to come across as a snob. I
do it every day. Don't feel bad.
No, I'm genuinely glad that people like things for the reasons that they like them, and just because they're not the reasons that I come to things doesn't mean that it's valid. But just for me personally, I've never been able to get on board the hype train. It just doesn't really do it for me. And I can certainly see to an extent, because like Dragon Ball is not a very complex or deep story. This is not like adult literature or anything. It is pretty basic, so I can understand a dismissive kind of, oh, why are you gonna nitpick this story for little kids kind of thing. It's supposed to be basic, but on one hand, I do feel that even kids shows can have enough of a narrative to be invested in it, and plus there are some really sophisticated children's programming nowadays that a lot of which can blow Dragon Ball out of the water, really.
My Hero Academia, you have to check it out. I'm serious. If you like the characterization and character arcs, you have to check it out.
I might love Dragon Ball to my dying day, but I will not hesitate to say that I think Avatar: The Last Airbender is a higher quality series.
Wow. See, I've never watched it, but I've had several people in my life who are equal Dragon Ball fans to me in every way, shape, and form say that exact same thing to me. I want to get into this Gohan question because I feel like we might bite off a whole extra bunch of stuff here. You recently started covering Buu in the Dragon Ball Dissection and did the Saiyaman chapters in your last 2 videos. And you talk about something that I feel is sort of, I don't know if I want to say misunderstood or misreported or whatever, but the idea of we have this 7-year time skip between the end of the Cell arc and the beginning of Buu. You frame the art right there. Kame Sennin comes in on the title page of that chapter and says, Son Gohan is taking over as our main protagonist here, and we pick up with him commuting to Satan City on Kinto-un to go to high school. So my question is, it all takes place over the course of 2 chapters, I think. His whole high school excursion and breaking up this bank robbery and making this persona of first it's the Golden Warrior to cover himself with the Super Saiyan transformation. He doesn't want anybody to know who he is. Goes and visits Bulma, gets the cool fancy watch. It was an opportunity for Dragon Ball to start over, I feel. And I don't know what made Toriyama sort of renege on it or sort of walk it back so quickly, but I feel like you did a really interesting job in breaking it down in the most 2 recent Dragon Ball Dissection videos. Just as like a summary of what you talked about within those 2 videos, what do you feel made Toriyama move away from Gohan and kind of revert back to Goku as that main protagonist in that arc?
Well, first I'll give Toriyama some credit. It was 5 chapters. It wasn't just 2.
Excuse me. So 5 weeks worth of material, setting up Gohan as the new main guy, and then Goku's back from the dead for a day, except now it's forever.
Well, I have had a few people in my comments on the last video, particularly, make the argument that this really isn't technically the end for Gohan. He's still sort of in the lead role, and it really is not really until Goku comes back to life that he really becomes the main character again. That's interesting. I mean, and it's really hard to get a clear gauge on what exactly Toriyama was thinking at any given time. Maybe he really did just intend to have Goku as a guest star at this point. But for me, though, it really does feel like the instant that Goku returns to that tournament, he has become the focal point again. And again, I haven't written the video on that section yet, so I'd have to really review to be completely sure on that. But it really just feels like, because I mentioned before on my video about this sort of orbit of depending on who the main character is who your supporting cast is going to be, basically. It's like, characters like Yamcha, Tenshinhan, and Chaozu really wouldn't fit that well in a Gohan-focused story because Gohan's not close to those characters. His orbit is slightly different from Goku's orbit. But once Goku comes back, the orbit moves completely to those same characters we had before. It's Goku who's leading the charge. He's the one who has the ideas. He's the one who follows the Kaioshin, and basically from the moment he comes back into the story, he has become the main character again. And so I have a hard time. It's an interesting thought process, but Gohan doesn't really do all that much from the moment Goku comes back. He gets his energy drained, and then he gets beaten by Buu. He's unconscious for a very long time. Then he's, sequestered away in the Kaioshin realm for a very long time, and he has a very brief moment to take center stage again. So it really doesn't feel like any of the Buu arc beyond these opening chapters really focus on him and his struggle and his story. It's the Saiyaman stuff, and it's those few chapters of training, and then the focus is completely shifted. It's hard for me to say exactly what would be the impetus for that. There have been a lot of interviews over the years and a lot of things that we do know about Dragon Ball, but generally speaking, they do tend to be a bit more, at least from what I understand about Dragon Ball interviews, they tend to be a lot more guarded in terms of, like, you don't have the same kind of audio commentaries you'd have on American shows where the creators sit down and go, well, we had this idea and we wrote this stuff down and and explain everything about how it happened. We have very little in regards to the creation of Dragon Ball overall. So we have like the Daizenshu 2 quote that I used in my video, which is simply Toriyama saying in a very vague way, I intended to make Gohan the main character. It didn't work out.
Yeah.
That's what he says. I did see a more recent interview. It's like a round table with him and Toyotaro in one of the Dragon Ball Super related things where they start talking about that. And Toriyama said that, and again, to be fair, this is like, almost 30 years later. He's saying that, I really enjoyed, that they were both saying, I really enjoyed all that stuff with Gohan in high school. And Toriyama's like, yeah, I really want to do it more. People seem to want to get to the next big thing, and so I really needed to move it along to the, to get a big, main villain in there. So I mean that might at least lend a little bit of credence. I don't think there's anything as, the fan rumors of there was a backlash and the fans revolted and they wouldn't let Gohan be the main character. I don't think there's never been anything to back that up. There might be something to the idea of the format being radically different. And yeah, it did seem to sort of lend itself, and the TV series definitely adapted it this way when they expanded it into a much more episodic series than it had been in a very long time. Of, Gohan goes to school and there's a threat to happen and he goes and transforms. It's almost like an episode of Power Rangers in a sense, or any other, where it's like you have a threat of the week and Gohan goes and defeats it. And it might have been that, and maybe it wouldn't have been that. There is definitely certainly some credence to the idea that it was very, very different from anything else in Dragon Ball. And whether that would fit to either what Toriyama was comfortable writing or what the fans expected from Dragon Ball, whether Gohan was the main character or not, it was definitely a departure, and I can see him because he definitely does go back to the formula as quickly as he possibly can. Um, as far as the characters themselves, I've seen some compelling arguments made that, especially, I've complained about Goku's characterization at certain points and how it's seems to have shifted into a certain more reckless persona as the years went by. But I've seen people say that without Goku being there to make reckless decisions, then the plot would resolve too easily. It's interesting. I don't know if I really buy it though, especially because and at the very least, the last two arcs, they rely on Vegeta screwing things up terribly.
A lot in the Cell arc specifically, yep. And then again, when he becomes Majin Vegeta, for sure.
Yeah, Buu Arc wouldn't have gotten off the ground if Vegeta hadn't betrayed everybody. So you could obviously do that without Goku there. It's really Vegeta who serves as the catalyst for terrible things happening. So you don't really need Goku for that. So I don't know. I do think it's possible Goku, while being a relatively static character, is a very unique, very vibrant character. He's someone who reacts to the world in very unique ways, has a very distinct sense of humor and ways of approaching the world that aren't really very orthodox. He's very esoteric.
And that's what makes so much of the charm of Dragon Ball, in my opinion. It's Goku's reaction to the world.
Yeah. And Gohan, for a lot of the run, was very much the kid character, and didn't really have much of an identity beyond that. He was brave, and he was strong, and he stood up for people who needed help. And I've seen people argue that he really didn't get a personality until he became a teenager. That he, turning him into this nerdier character was at least a direction for his character to go in.
But I feel like you could make the argument that everything you'd seen from Gohan previous to him being in high school, it all equals out. Like, that math equation balances out for me. Like, the nerd in high school who has the ambition to protect people with his strength and all that, given everything we know about Gohan leading up to it, it makes sense that that's what his personality turns out to be. That's like the only logical progression, in my opinion.
Oh, definitely. I mean, yeah, I don't think those people are saying that it's out of character, but just that it really actually defines it in a way that makes him more than just, stalwart and brave and rights the wrongs. It actually gives him more of a personality. But maybe that just wasn't enough compared to Goku, perhaps. I don't know. Again, it's difficult because one, I would have to dig into the mind of Toriyama.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. And two, as I said in my last episode of Dragon Ball Dissection, is that it's hard to judge the quality of something that you haven't actually seen. Just like with the number 19 and number 20 as Toriyama's only idea for villains in the Cell arc. It's like his previous editor Torishima had come in and said, this isn't going to work, change it. And it's like, he could be right, but me speaking as a person who's just reading the finished product, I haven't seen it, so I don't really know if it worked or not. Likewise, since we spend, about 2/3 of the Great Saiyaman stuff just setting up Great Saiyaman, and he really gets to do one thing before he's retired, it's hard for me to say, yeah, this was a failure, or this wouldn't work, because I don't really know what it would have been, or what it could have been, if it had been allowed to continue on. It might have been like what the TV series did, where it was an episodic, Gohan fights the bad guy every episode, or it might have, evolved into something different. It might, it could have been, who knows what it could have been? We really don't know, and we don't know if Toriyama had any idea what it would have been,
Well, I think that's an interesting point, is because the way that you just answered that question had me think about this whole situation in a way that I'd never really considered before, is maybe Toriyama got to this whole Gohan as the protagonist thing, and he just wasn't really sure what exactly to do with it. Like, the thing that made me think of it was, you mentioned the smaller circles. Like, yeah, maybe Gohan has a close connection to the obvious ones like Piccolo and Krillin, but like Tianjinhan, Yamcha, Chaozu, they're all going to be out here in the distance. How do you kind of rectify, especially with a show like Dragon Ball, where so much of it is tied into like the merchandising aspect and having as many characters involved as you possibly can, why wouldn't you put yourself in a position to keep that cast as expansive as possible when the alternative is, all right, let's take the son of the main character and put him in this territory where we're not really sure what we can do with it, that being, him as a high school student, and see what we can come of it when we already know that this is like the tried and true formula in terms of the Z Warriors and all of their fights to this point. Obviously, I say Z Warriors and want to say Dragon Team.
Yeah, it was definitely a risky concept to go into. I mean, like, to bring the merchandising into it, like you just said. It's like I have a hard time. And again, this is, like I said, who knows how things would have panned out had it kept going. But it's like, yeah, it's hard to imagine, Shopner, the long-haired blonde jock, selling a lot of action figures. It's like, maybe he could have. I don't know.
If they made an SBC of Shopner, I would have totally bought it. No doubt about it.
Yeah, but it's like, yeah, it really was. It is kind of impressive that Toriyama just really, because there were certainly safer ways you could make Gohan the main character, I suppose, than completely shuffling off almost the entire main cast. In the Great Saiyaman stuff, you get a couple of cameos by like Vegeta and Trunks maybe, but yeah, it's introducing all these new characters. It's Videl and it's Ereza and Shopner and some unnamed kid wearing glasses, and it was definitely a risky proposition, and I respect that because I'm trying to wait till we get to the super part for this, but it's that's something that I really like about Dragon Ball. But I can definitely see why that would be off-putting or maybe unworkable. I'm not going to, as much as I dig into how abrupt that change feels, I'm not just going to go out and say that maybe it wasn't better for him to have cut his losses at that point, that maybe the abrupt shift was worth not having a bunch of terrible, Great Saiyaman chapters after that. But me personally, I really did enjoy what's there.
So with you finally reaching this final arc in the Majin Buu arc, once you finish coverage of the Buu arc, what does the future of Dragon Ball Dissection look like? I know to this point you haven't been super, I guess I'll say thrilled on Dragon Ball Super. I want to ask you more about that in a minute, but do you plan to go forward and maybe do the Dragon Ball Super manga? Because given the weird nature of how the anime given the weird nature of how the anime precedes the manga in the case of Dragon Ball Super, I would really be interested to hear your analysis on the reverse process of how the anime influences the manga as opposed to how the manga influences the anime.
First, I'm definitely going to be taking Dragon Ball Dissection through the original Dragon Ball, and I will definitely be finishing up, DBD TV for Dragon Ball Z television series and all the movies of that era. What happens after that, I'm not entirely sure. It really just sort of depends on how my overall channel and life is doing, because it is certainly, at that point, I'll have been doing it for probably 10 years at that point, and so it's like, how much of my life do I want to devote to something that when I first started the series, I thought it was a done deal. It was a series with a franchise with a finite conclusion, and suddenly, a few years into this project, suddenly all this new Dragon Ball stuff comes out, and I'm a little bit bitter about that. Because it's like, oh my god, I'm going to be trapped doing this for the rest of my life. But at the same time, it's not something that now that I've done it for so long, it's something that I'm terrified of letting go of. So we will see. It sort of depends on how successful my channel ends up being, as to whether or not I will feel compelled or be able to, continue it on for for how many more years after that. But it's interesting though, because that whole can of worms. It's like reviewing Dragon Ball used to be so simple. It was you had a comic book series. It was called Dragon Ball, and then there was a TV series that was based off of it. And it was really simple. You had this continuity and you had that thing. And now with Super, everything is just so complicated. I have no idea how I would structure Dragon Ball Super if I were to cover Dragon Ball Super on Dragon Ball Dissection, because for those who are listening and may not follow Dragon Ball Dissection, my main series is covering the manga storyline. That's when I cover the story of it. And the TV adaptation, if you haven't read the manga, the TV version is almost panel for panel the exact same story as the manga. It just adds other things into it. So then when I go back later and cover the TV version, it's almost like a companion piece. I don't go over the story again because I've already covered that. Nothing's really changed. I just go over things that have changed or been added or been removed, things of that nature. So with Dragon Ball Super, it's not as cut and dry. This is the source and this is the adaptation. This is like Toriyama's, the notes he wrote on a napkin, and then you have two different branches, 2 or 3 different branches based off the same thing. So they're all just, which I'm not saying is bad, necessarily. But it just means there are like more distinct branches in Dragon Ball than there ever have been before, as opposed to this is the same thing but with slight differences. We're starting from the same basic premise and then going our own way. And you said that in this case the anime preceded the manga, but actually your question says anime first in my twice in mine.
Yeah, no, it says that on mine too. That's why I had to stop and restart that line.
But at certain points early on, like the manga chapters were coming out before the TV series episodes. Like it was considered a promotional thing earlier on. Eventually, the TV series caught up and surpassed it. But the first couple of story arcs, the manga chapters were coming out first. So it depends on where you are as to what even is what even is the original anymore. I don't even know.
It's confusing in and of itself because the only manga that I could think that preceded it, unless I'm wrong, which is a very high possibility, especially considering who I'm talking with here, the manga that probably preceded the television series was probably movie adaptations of Battle of Gods and Fakatsu no F. I'd have to imagine they weren't doing episodic manga chapters before the television series started, were they? I don't think that they were.
I think again, it's been a few years at this point, but I seem to recall because it's like the manga sort of evolved over time, because originally it was intended as a promotional piece. It was there to hype up and sell the TV series, and since then it's sort of become more of its own standalone thing. But again, I could be misremembering this, but I do seem to recall that for a while early on, the manga was coming out before the TV series. And like, someone feel free to fact check me on that. Because again, I have not gone back and rewatched Super since it ended 2 years ago. I have, this is in your next question, or is it?
It is, yeah. Actually, we've kind of covered this for the next question a little bit. We've sort of already touched on it, but I'll just ask it and sort of line it up with the expectation or the understanding that you've sort of already started to answer it. I think from at least a personal perspective. I know you've never been super thrilled with the idea of Dragon Ball returning, and have said it on multiple occasions. You've said you'd be fine if the series stayed dead. And I can understand how somebody'd feel that way, especially given the way that you just outlined it with how you originally planned to structure your content. And then 2 years in, you find out the series is continuing. But I'm curious about what made you feel that way. And if your stance on Super has softened at all since it's 2 years, I think 2 weeks ago, it's been off the air. Time flies when you're waiting for Dragon Ball to come back.
Well, I guess there's like the macro answer and then the micro answer. Generally speaking, I'm always wary of when something ends, like has a definite endpoint, and then comes back. Especially something that is as narrative heavy as Dragon Ball. Despite what people say about you watch Dragon Ball for the story, it is very much a there is a lot of story to it. It might not be deep, but it is something that, since it is serialized, it's not like an episode of Family Guy or Looney Tunes where there's no continuity going on, where you can just sort of bring out these characters and they don't age, they don't really change, they or even even to a lesser extent like American comics, where it's Batman's been fighting crime in certain continuities for like 80 years or so, with barring the occasional Crisis on Infinite Earths type reboot. But it's like it's basically Batman is Batman. He is a static character, and you might do different riffs on that character, but that's all different continuities, as opposed to the character really evolving and aging, and with some exceptions, obviously. But Dragon Ball is a continuous story where the characters grow and they age, and then it's eventually that story ends. So I'm always wary, especially when it comes back, decades later. There's always this weird feeling of disconnect. I have this sort of distrustful feeling of, well, why are you bringing this back? It's like, what is your like? Do you have a story you want to tell, or is this
what it's about?
Yeah, exactly. Like, or all the kids who watched it are grown ups now, like, oh, I got to get my nostalgia fix, kind of thing.
And I have disposable income.
Exactly. So it's like, why are you doing this? But I don't like have this hardline moratorium. You can never make more things. While I'm wary of it, I always try to keep an open mind and not really judge it until I see it. It's like, okay, I'll give it a chance, because I certainly, again, as a Star Trek fan, I certainly got into the original series before anything else. And in '87, when Next Generation came out, you had those fans who were like, Star Trek without Kirk and Spock, that's not even real Star Trek, kind of thing. But Next Generation eventually became a really high quality series, and I love me some Deep Space Nine, so it's obviously it's possible, to pick something back up again and make quality stories out of it. To go back to Avatar, I love that series, and they did a sequel series of that, The Legend of Korra. And I'm not as over the moon about it as I was Avatar. I'm actually in the middle of rewatching it right now. I've only ever seen it once. But the one thing, well, I can give them credit for a lot of things, and very, very high quality animation and combat, and fairly deep storytelling for children's animation. But the one thing you can't accuse them of is just going back to the well and nostalgia tripping. That's a series that sort of, purposely removes a lot of familiar elements and pushes a lot of things into, changes the setting quite a bit and changes the way the storytelling is. Like, so there might be elements of those stories I don't care for, but I have to respect the fact that they definitely had a story they wanted to tell, and it wasn't a story that was just rehashing what they'd already done. My problem with Dragon Ball Super, and it's funny, your question at the end is if my stance has softened over over time. It was really something that it more hardened over time, honestly, because I was late getting into Dragon Ball Super in the first place. Like I don't think I started watching it, because it started airing in the summer of 2015, I believe, in July 2015, I think. Yep. And I didn't start watching it until sometime around the spring of 2016.
Oh wow!
So I was playing catch up. I didn't catch up entirely until, God, I don't even know how long it took me to catch up. It might have been like just before the universe survival stuff. Really,
but so you were really watching week to week once that started, weren't you?
Unfortunately, yes.
So weren't we all, man?
I'm comfortable talking about the original Dragon Ball because I've read it and seen it so many times. It's something I'm intimately familiar with. There are definitely things I have to fact check myself on because I don't have like a perfectly didactic memory. But I know the series pretty much inside and out. Super I've seen once, so I do hesitate to give a definitive sort of, this is what's wrong with it kind of thing when I haven't seen it in 2 years. But the overall sentiment that I get from Dragon Ball Super, and I didn't hate it at first. It just like, but it was for most of its run for me, it was okay. It kept like a pretty solid baseline of this is passable, with occasional moments that I really enjoyed, and then some that really pissed me off. It really wasn't until the final story arc that I really started to hate it. But overall, I got a very general sense from Dragon Ball Super that one, it was very much interested in reliving its glory days, taking as many things out of mothballs as possible, as much iconography, as many waylaid characters that were popular. And just rehashing them. And now I finally get to say it. What I love most about Dragon Ball is its sense of growth. that sense that, because again, going back to those late 90s years, it was finding all of these things that were totally different from one another. It's like I came into it through, Vegeta was there and Frieza was the villain and stuff like that, and then suddenly going back and looking at all this stuff about tournaments and climbing this tower and fighting a Terminator robot, and then going and like it's just to distill it into one moment. Like I would visit my cousins as a kid, and I would record Dragon Ball Z off of the broadcast on Toonami, and I introduced him to the series by showing him my tapes. And then once I started collecting fan subs, I brought those one summer, and we'd gotten through the Frieza arc, and I just popped in that tape, and suddenly Gohan's in high school, and my cousin, like, his jaw just dropped, and I wanted to run it back and like, well, here's some context for this, but he's like, no, I just want to keep watching this, because his mind was just so blown. You can dip your toe into so many different points of just random points in Dragon Ball, and you're gonna find something totally different. It might be as off the wall as suddenly Gohan's in high school and trying to be a superhero, or it could be, Goku's flying in this Nazi-inspired plane to this bizarre, Jingle Village where there's a Frankenstein monster there, or you could be at a point where they're in outer space. It's like Dragon Ball. There is no real status quo for original Dragon Ball. There's never a point where it feels like, oh, there's no reset button aside from the Dragon Balls themselves and the ability to bring characters and planets back to life. Things are always moving forward, It's always so cool when, we're going to skip the story ahead 7 years, and suddenly, Trunks, who was a baby and who we knew was this adult from the future, he's this totally different character now because he's a kid, and now Gohan's in high school, and it's like, Dragon Ball, the one constant of Dragon Ball is that it always changed, and that was something that Toriyama was always very, very adamant about and very consistent with. Like, because his editor at the time, Torishima, was terrified at the thought of Goku becoming an adult, because that's not how you necessarily market things to children. It's all about the merchandising. It's all about the recognizability. It's all about keeping iconography. Look, and I very pointedly, like, someone called me out on this on my last episode of Dragon Ball Dissection. I go into a big talk about Kuririn in this arc, and how Toriyama completely removed everything that was recognizable about that character in the Buu arc. He has hair. His burn marks are covered by that hair, Like, everything that defined what he looked like, Toriyama didn't care. He took all that away, Like, and the fact that he could do that he would always do that, is what impresses me the most about Dragon Ball. And it's why Dragon Ball Super just feels so boring to me.
I think you're dancing around it. It's because we're in that static time frame of that 10 years between the end of the end of Buu and the end of Z. Like, there's no progression. There's no real opportunity for a big time skip. There's no opportunity to get to know these characters on another level other than the level we've already known them at for the last 20 or so years. It's kind of infuriating.
Exactly. And I get it because like I said, I feel like Dragon Ball had sort of run its course when it ended originally. And so I understand Toriyama as well. I don't want to move them farther than that because they look old and this and that, and but I don't know if there's that many more places you can really take them, but it does feel incredibly safe. That and it trickles down to so many things where it's like all the oft-repeated complaints about Super, where it's like, oh, Goten and Trunks should be like 14 years old now, and they look the same as they did before, and it's like, oh, Goku and Vegeta got new outfits, but now they're back in their old ones because that's what people recognize. It all just like, I don't have any pretend, like, Dragon Ball is not this highbrow work of art. Toriyama has admitted that he got into manga in order to make money, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that I'm not like one of these hipsters who has to, like, oh, you're selling out kind of thing. People got to eat, and it's nice to be able to make a living doing what you love. So I have no delusions about early Dragon Ball being like this highbrow art that was done for the love of the craft, whereas Dragon Ball Super is just marketing shill. Dragon Ball was certainly done for money too, but that doesn't stop Dragon Ball Super from largely feeling like it is marketing shill, or it is just like, let's keep the characters in, as recognizable as possible, and let's not have things move. And all the arcs just sort of end with like, we saved the day. Let's go back to Capsule Corporation and eat some barbecue, and then set up the pieces for the next. And it even though it's still a serialized show, like as in the individual episodes carry on from one another, the stories they tell feel very episodic.
So, do you think that any of what we're talking about here plays into the role of Super being canceled when it did? Because going into the Tournament of Power, the way that I looked at it was, especially after coming out of episodes 109 and 110, the first Goku Jiren fight literally broke the internet. Like Crunchyroll, all these streaming websites were down, and in my brain, I remember where I was that day. I was playing at a wedding at a cocktail hour with my acoustic, and I had to rush home to get to record the next episode of Super Dope with my friends. It was like fight night. It was like a pay-per-view event. And waking up the next day and reading those reports of it basically, quote unquote, broke the internet. I was like, this is Dragon Ball at an all-time high. I'm living in the golden age of Dragon Ball. And the way that I looked at the Tournament of Power arc was they've sort of fast-tracked Dragon Ball's world building. Like, we've got all these multiple different universes to go out and explore, all these strong fighters to go out and explore. We've already very much explored the upper limits of our own respective universe. So, we're going to have to go out and find some other strong people to go out there and try to fight. And it just made no sense to set up all whatever these 8 universes. Is that what? Yeah, 8 universes of 10 fighters, 80 fighters in total. And then when they get to the conclusion of it, after we've met these people on very surface level kind of interactions, we've got the ability to go explore their universes. They pull the plug on it. Do you think that pulling the plug on Super had anything to do with just feeling kind of stuck in the time period that we're in at this point? Like, what do you think is what do you think is some of the contributing factors to them deciding to cancel the Super anime when they did?
I definitely feel like there are people who follow the production side of this more closely than I do.
Shout out Anime AJ.
He was one of the people I was thinking of, definitely, yes. Because I definitely recall seeing a tweet from him recently where he was talking about this, where he said there's a translation from one of the writers, I think, on the show who had admitted that like the planning of the series was just a total mess. In terms of the beginning, like you had this really, they really fast tracked that series and didn't plan for it properly. And so you had these really terrible looking episodes and episodes that were rushed out the door. And there just wasn't like the necessary production pipeline created to make a quality series. It was really just marketing shill again. It was this had become hot. This had become like they didn't expect, the Battle of Gods to be as popular as it was, and they suddenly had this thing on their hands. They wanted to capitalize on it while it was still hot, and so it just sort of became this thing. Rather than organically growing. I've also heard certain things to the extent that simply that Toriyama hasn't developed any further storylines, and they're afraid to go on without him. Because and I can understand that, because just based on the beginning of the series where they were just willing to seem perfectly fine rushing it out the door, it doesn't seem like quality control takes precedence over selling the toys. So
very true.
So it's hard. So it's hard for me to say that they just really wanted to be the best they could. Maybe they do. I don't know. But it's difficult for me to really answer that, just because for one I might be missing some crucial information that I haven't researched yet, because I'm not covering that right now. And
right now,
two,
meaning that you'll do so in the future. Caught you. Well, one of my favorite Dragon Ball Dissection movie entries is your analysis of the first Broly movie. I believe it's called Broly the Legendary Marketing Ploy. Is that correct?
That sounds right, yeah.
Do you remember where you were? Because I certainly remember, and I unfortunately probably will always remember this, but do you remember where you were and what your reaction was to learning that Broly was going to be like the main protagonist in the Dragon Ball 20th movie.
I'm pretty sure I was sitting at this desk. I'm pretty sure I learned about it on Twitter. So I was on my computer at the time, and I don't know. I don't recall. I certainly wasn't like stomping around going but it was something that was a sort of a throw up your hands kind of, yeah, this boy, I really expected this in a sort of, they just brought back Frieza. We're just gonna keep on just dipping into the well and bringing back old popular characters, and it really just sort of it sort of confirmed my anti-super bias, I guess you could say, that they weren't terribly creative and more interested in selling toys than telling a story.
Well, one of the things that you say in that marketing ploy video, I didn't realize I needed somebody to help me articulate it, but going back through some of your content as I researched this week, there was this quote in that video where I was like, that's it. That's exactly how I feel about Broly. So much to the point where I had to rewind it and get out my voice memo recorder and my phone to be able to record it. But this is how you sum up Broly in a lot of ways in regards to that first movie, not specific to Super.
Now, let me be clear. I'm mostly apathetic towards the character of Broly. I'm neither particularly interested in him, nor do I really dislike him. I'm a little iffier in regards to what he seems to represent to the fandom, and more importantly, the image he presents of the franchise as a whole. As I've stated multiple times, the surface-level spectacle of over-muscled meatheads screaming loudly and laying the smackdown on each other is the facet of Dragon Ball I find least appealing. And since original Broly is the most roided-out, primal screaming, animalistic, club someone over the head caveman the franchise has ever produced, I don't get the hype.
So well put. And that was sort of my reaction, was like, all right, they're obviously cashing in on this fan service character and somebody that, for whatever reason, maybe some that you just articulated there in your little sound clip, the character of Broly resonates with a certain sect of our Dragon Ball fandom, and I don't know, I don't want to say it diametrically opposes a lot of the things that we may enjoy as Dragon Ball fans, but sometimes it does. And I don't know, do you appreciate or like or dislike, how do you feel about what they've done to the recharacterization of Broly?
Well, first of all, it is funny that that's sort of really the quote you chose digs into stuff we were sort of talking about earlier about, and again, I have no, I'm not trying to shame anybody if you're into that aspect of Dragon Ball, or
shame them. It's okay. Shame them.
No, I'm not here to shame anybody. It just doesn't really do it for me. Just like I'm not a big pro wrestling fan, but I know there's a lot of overlap with Dragon Ball and pro wrestling, which I didn't know at first either until I became friends with the people who were into Dragon Ball. But yeah, and I can see why. It's just not really what I come to Dragon Ball for. But the question was about the new Broly's characterization, correct?
Yes.
Well, to an extent, I am impressed. I am impressed that they didn't simply dust off movie Broly and just transplant him into this universe. The fact that, obviously bringing Broly back is a big marketing thing. He has brand recognition. He's gonna put butts into theater seats. So there is certainly enough cynicism to go around with that. But there is at least something to be said for the fact that they made their own Broly. I would still rather it have just been a completely brand new character, let it stand on its own 2 feet. But
that's what kind of upset me about that, was because that teaser trailer, everyone theorized that it was the legendary Super Saiyan God Yamoshi or whatever. And it looked like,
I forgot about that.
From a production perspective, it looked like that's how they were going to pitch it. And then 4 or 5 months later, they're like, just kidding. That legendary Super Saiyan God that we've been teasing, it's Broly. But that's what really upset me about that announcement, I think, was they teased something that was going to be original and new and fresh in a different sort of direction. And in a lot of ways, what I want to see with Dragon Ball is I guess more sort of like lore building to the grander world outside of our characters. I mean, we've already got like the upper echelon of like the god structure and things like that, but like things that have happened in the past. I'm curious about things like or expanding more on things like that. And I thought Yamoshi would be a great avenue to be able to explore that and get to see not like the culture of the Saiyans on planet Vegeta when it was King Vegeta and Bardock, but hundreds and hundreds of years or thousands of years before or whatever. But for them to just bail out to the safe thing of Broly, I ripped out most of my hair that day. It's true.
Well, I know it feels like I'm damning with faint praise, and in a sense, since I am, but just based on the bar set for Super and the way they approach the iconography and the staying in place, yeah, it would have been. It would have been better if it had been a brand new character, I think. I would have had more respect for it, I suppose, had it been a new character. But given the standard that had been set by Super, just the fact that it was a different character at all, was enough to sort of at least, allow me to consider it, I suppose, as something worthy.
So have you watched the movie more than just that first time you watched it, or have you done No? That's really just the one time?
Just the one time.
I think I've watched it 3 times, but I think only 2 of them count because the first time I watched it, it was out of the front pocket of a Japanese man with his cell phone, ripping it from the theater. I was really anxious to see it. But I've since seen it in sub and dub once, and I don't know, I think it's a pretty good movie. I like what they tried to do with the character. I don't like that the first 15 to 20% of the movie is basically a soft retelling of Dragon Ball Minus, and I know that you feel very passionately about Minus. If you want to know how Lance feels about Dragon Ball Minus, you have to go check out Dragon Ball Dissected. But the first 15 minutes of that movie could have been very easily cut. You don't need that there. And you could have allocated more time to the story of Broly and Paragus, I guess, specifically. Like, I feel like so much of that flashback stuff was just to be like, oh, look, Bardock's here, and look, we've got Goku's mom animated now, and Goku was a little bit older and in Saiyan armor and a little bit more cognizant of what was going on than we cared to admit 30 years ago. Like, so much of it kind of pissed me off, but they could have allocated more time to exploring the character of Broly as opposed to 50% part of the movie or 50% mark of the movie. It's just an all-out brawl.
Yeah, well, I feel like they could have gone multiple directions with this, and I see people who defend the movie, and to be clear, at least as far as I remember it, in the vlog that I made when I gave my thoughts on the movie when it first came out, when I first saw it. In terms of modern Dragon Ball content, I would definitely place it somewhere in the upper tier. Like, this isn't the bottom of the barrel for me. There was a lot that I liked about that movie. It's not, so I didn't go in there to hate it.
It's not revival of F or anything. So bad.
No, it's not. I definitely didn't go in there to hate it. There were definitely a lot of things I did like about it. But I feel like people who defend those aspects of the film do so in that sort of the way the marketing sort of hyped it up, which was you have these 2 generations of Saiyan warriors, and you have the parallels between their dads and then them, and it's like. And sort of like the marketing tagline for Resurrection F, the worst wish in history. There's a lot that could be mined there. I just don't think they really did. So a lot of that stuff ends up coming across as just fan service. Like, oh, here's the thing. Here's how Frieza became the leader of the Frieza Force.
Here's the Ginyus. Here's the start of Scouters.
Yeah, exactly. It's all just this sort of, random pointless world building stuff that's just there so fans can go, oh, it's that thing I like, and here's the thing about that thing. Because I think like the main problem in trying to make this a multi-generational epic and to develop parallels between these 2 different generations really sort of falters in the fact that Goku and Vegeta don't really serve any purpose in this movie besides just being the other people who are fighting Broly. Like the movie is about Broly, and when it's focusing on Broly, I think it's actually pretty good. But then all of a sudden it becomes, let's go to Earth and fight Goku and Vegeta, and Goku and Vegeta don't really have a purpose or a function or a characterization beyond we're gonna fight now. So it kind of falls flat when you're trying to market this as a character story when two of those three leads don't really have a story function.
And I think that I would agree with everything that you just said in most ways. I mean, they try so hard to tie like the three Saiyans' fate as babies, and now they're adults and they're running into each other again. Like that's so shoehorned into that plot, and like the only reason they even dream to do that retail to minus. But you're right. I think a lot of the characterization or like the reason for Vegeta and Goku to even be involved in this plot isn't really there outside of the fact that they have to fight somebody strong. But I think they sort of try to salvage it at the end of the movie with Goku going back to Planet Vampa and extending his hand as sort of an ally to a Broly who we're not really sure how he could end up at this point. He could end up a permanent antagonist. He could end up an ally in the future. I think I'm very interested to see if and when the series does touch back on Broly's character, where that goes. But I think a lot of that movie was sort of written or planned out with strictly the end in mind. It's like, what can we do to maybe make Broly a good guy at the end of this? And how do we get there? We'll give you an hour worth of okay fights after we give you, 45 minutes of fan service.
Yeah, and I'm not saying because Broly is very very differently structured, and you sort of hit the nail on the head with the way you worded that when you said that they needed somebody to fight, and usually it would be the other way around, where it's you have Goku and Vegeta, and you need somebody for them to fight because they are the they are the focal point characters. They aren't really the focal characters in this movie, and that's fine. I'm not saying you can't make a Dragon Ball movie that focuses on somebody else. In fact, that's kind of nice. But the movie really is about Broly and his story, and because of the way it's structured, it doesn't really feel like the main Dragon Ball characters are there, other than the fact that this is a Dragon Ball movie and they need to be there. And so it just feels like there are a lot of things here that don't necessarily coalesce in a cohesive way. It's like, yeah, you could do the multi-generational, father-son story if you really committed to that, or you could do a really really deep character piece about Broly himself if you committed to that. Or you could do a standard format Dragon Ball movie where Goku and Vegeta are the focus and they meet this villain, sort of like the original Broly movie. But this sort of feels like this weird amalgamation of all of those things, where none of them really gets enough attention, because I feel like they had just gotten to the point of developing Broly enough to make him interesting, when suddenly the fighting starts and everything interesting about him just goes out the window. And there's the story it stops. This is a hard dividing line between this is the story section and then this is the big giant battle section. And the whole time the battle's going on, it's like, I want to see more of Chi-Lai and Limo. They were interesting and exciting, and actually the movie's more about them than it is about Goku and Vegeta, really.
Yeah.
And it's like I want to see more of that relationship forming, and like they just disappear for like the next 30 minutes or so, and it's really jarring. It's like three different movies that have been sewn together.
Yeah, when you put it like that actually, it's a very nice way to put it. Like the minus part of it is one part, and then you've got the pre-Broly and then the fight. Three very distinctive sections of that movie. I'm gonna kind of flip the question structure around on you here, because I feel like it ties together a little bit more on the topic of the Broly movie. While the story wasn't anything super revolutionary, I mean, it was definitely like fan service the movie. That much we're definitely sure of. I think a big talking point about this film was the character redesign and the shift away from Yamamuro's character designs to the Shintani character designs. And I think what a lot of people would call a more, I don't know, it's less angular. That's one way to say it. It's a little bit more simplified. It's a little bit less plastic looking. Like, we can go down the list of like all the things that people bag on Yamamuro about, but a big part of this movie was the Shintani redesign. Do you think do you think that when the series comes back, do you think that they're more apt to go with the Shintani aesthetic, or do you think that they're apt to fall back to the Yamamuro character designs?
is this more about what I want or what I think will actually happen?
You can answer both. I mean, what would you want to see?
Because I must preface this by saying again, story and characterization are the most important things to me when it comes to Dragon Ball. Other things are more secondary concern. I'm not AJ. I'm not saying I don't care about art, but it's not really my area of expertise. It's not something that I focus on as much. The things that I recognize when a large artistic shift has happened in a series, but it's not something that I'm gonna like pin all my hopes and dreams on, or it's really going to ultimately affect how I enjoy the storytelling. I did enjoy Shintani's art, although I should go back and say that Yamamuro has gotten a bad rap, and probably deservedly so, over the past several years. But when he took over as animation supervisor for Shindo Pro in the Cell arc, I thought that was a huge step up for that studio. I thought that Shindo Pro looked much better after Yamamuro took over. His work back in the early '90s was pretty fantastic. I love his work then. I don't tend to care for it as much in modern Dragon Ball when, like you said, it's very, very stiff looking and very plastic looking. But granted, just the way Dragon Ball is designed, even going back to like the later parts of the original series, the mid to late '90s, I've always much preferred the rounder style to the more angular stuff anyway, be it Toriyama's interpretation or Yamamuro's or anybody else's. So I definitely liked Shintani's designs. It was I preferred it to what Yamamuro's designs were in Super, to be sure. It's nice and light. I think it animates well. It's a nice change from a series that has overall been too much of the same for me anyway. So just having a new look for it. I mean, granted, I liked when we entered the universe revival stuff, and we had like that new, like, thicker outline on characters. I thought that looked kind of nice too. Just do I think it will come back though? I don't see why not, but I guess it really depends on what it was they were trying to accomplish with that movie in the first place. It's like it's especially harder to note now that Dragon Ball has kind of stalled since then, except for Heroes, but Heroes doesn't use the Shintani style, does it? It does
not.
Yeah. So that kind of complicates.
Although I guess you could make the argument, because I know that the base form Gogeta definitely made an appearance in the last several episodes at some point, and it does have like it's almost like a mashup of the two styles. Like, it's a little bit more rounded than a typical Yamamuro character design would be, but it's not quite full, like popped out of the Broly movie. It's difficult to describe. So the way that I look at the Broly movie is an opportunity for them to, because it's been so well documented, like the sort of animation woes that they had or the production struggles that they had. And I've also seen through, mainly like guys like AJ, who are very talented and have the eyes that they do to see what they see. Yamamuro's art isn't exactly a very easy thing to replicate for a lot of animators. So taking that Shintani character design and a more simplification of it would hopefully open up the talent pool for potential animators when the series were ready to return. They wouldn't have to pick from such like a narrow field of talent. They'd have more options to choose from, and that would help with some of the production stuff. If they come back and don't do the Shintani art style, I would be kind of flabbergasted. But you do mention the hero stuff and how that's still in the Yamamuro style, but that's only once a month for 8 minutes. Like, I could see them continuing to do that and have that just be his little pet project for the duration of his time with Dragon Ball, or however long he wants to do that.
I really think it depends on whether or not, like, what their intention was with the design of this movie. Was this supposed to be the bold new direction of Dragon Ball going forward, or was this designed to give the movie a distinctive look on its own? Because if it's, that's really going to depend on. That's really going to determine where they're going to go with this. I would think. Because if it's the former, then yeah, I could definitely see Super picking up, or whatever the successor to Super is, picking up with that style. But if it was meant to just give that movie a distinctive look, then I can see them going back to the status quo.
So now that Super as a series, concluded, paused, however you want to look at it, but the manga has continued on with the Moro arc. Are you reading the chapters month to month? And if you are, what are your impressions on Moro the villain or the arc as a whole?
I have not made it past the first volume of this Dragon Ball Super manga.
What the fuck, Lance? That's not cool. Moro's kind of up your alley. I feel like in a lot of ways he borrows from past Dragon Ball arcs in a few different ways. I really like this arc in the sense that they go to New Namek at the beginning of it, and they kind of not borrow, but like revisit little other elements of Dragon Ball that are like, hey, remember this? And it hits all the right nostalgia feels for me for sure. But how have you're not even a little bit interested?
It's not that I'm not interested. Well, I mean, it is kind of hard to drum up interest, but it is really just the. There are only so many hours in the day, and there's only so many hours of a day I want to devote to Dragon Ball. And because I've said it a lot to a lot of people over the years, is that I really miss just being able to just go back, pick up Dragon Ball Volume 1, and just work my way through the series for fun. You know, I haven't gotten to do that in 8 years.
Wow.
Because I'm always working with Dragon Ball. So it's like at the same time, at any given time, it's like right now, I'm working on Dragon Ball Dissection for the Buu Arc, so I'm stuck in, I have that manga volume at my desk at all times right now. I'm working through that. I started, a watch through of the animated series in 2014, which ended up setting up Dragon Ball, which ended up setting DBD TV, the television portion of Dragon Ball Dissection, where I would watch the series while following along in the manga and making note of any of the differences. And I'm still working on that. I'm on GT right now.
Wow.
So yeah, so right now I'm in the Buu Arc and I'm in GT, depending on what work I'm working on right now. And then also, I got Movie 9 coming up in a little bit. I just got done doing the Frieza arc for DBD TV, so I was immersed in that over Christmas, So at any given point, I have 5 different Dragon Ball things going on at once. And Dragon Ball is not my entire life, and I feel like I would grow to hate it. And that is part of why I definitely will, if and when I cover Dragon Ball Super and Dragon Ball Dissection, it's something I would have to go back and watch again, because for all I know, I don't think this is the case, but it might have some influence on the fact that there was just, I see all these people who were, so sad that Super was gone because they so enjoyed watching Dragon Ball on a week-to-week basis. For me, it was just a pain in the ass, It was, having to search this down and watch it every Sunday morning, in addition to all the other Dragon Ball stuff I had to do, and it was just overload, and so and so yeah, I'm amazed I made it through the TV series of Dragon Ball Super, and I own the first 2 volumes of the manga, and I never made it past the first volume, and I just haven't really had much desire to keep going with it, because there's just other things I want to do with my life than just constant Dragon Ball. I'm sorry.
That makes sense to me, but at the same time, the reason I ask, it's sort of a selfish reason to ask. I think I mentioned it earlier. I would be interested to see what your analysis would be with the source content being the anime for all intents and purposes, and then having the manga be the adaptation or the streamlined version or whatever you want to say afterwards. That reverse delivery of the mediums is interesting to me to see what Toyotaro and Akira Toriyama look at and say that works, or this is what needs to be changed, or this is what works for the manga medium versus the anime medium. All of that stuff is interesting to me to think about, but I'd like to hear it from perspective like yours.
Well, no, because I find that very interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, because I do get kind of tired of hearing people say the Dragon Ball Super is over, because it's not, and it is really interesting, and I'd be interested to see how it works in Japan. But again, that whether or not the Super manga still has that status of promotional, especially now that it's doing its own storyline. But because Dragon Ball traditionally, the manga is the source, for the original Dragon Ball, that was the story, and the TV version was an adaptation, and obviously here in America, at the very least, fans tend to be more exposed to the TV series, and that's what they view as sort of the be all end all. So to the point that obviously there are a lot of different translation styles out there, official and unofficial, and depending on what you watch. But it's like people tend to forget, and obviously I'm no stranger to people complaining about my translation choices that I use on my channel. But it's like, what really blows my mind is that people tend to forget, when they certain things that they criticize for me using. It's like, you can walk into any bookstore in this country, and you could do that for the past 20 years, and pick up an officially English translated version of the original Dragon Ball manga, and you're gonna find a lot of the names that I use in my show. And you're acting like I have all the names wrong, but it's like they just don't know it. So because and that's just the divide you have, where it's like the original Dragon Ball source is there for anybody. It's not some obscure thing. It's there on the shelves and it's never gone away. And it's like so many people just don't even know about it. So that's why you get this weird thing where people say, I can't wait for Dragon Ball Super to come back, as if it actually went anywhere. When it is there, it didn't stop. It hasn't stopped.
Well, it's really frustrating to me is so much of what the moral arc has been to this point is like I said, they pick from like certain pieces of Dragon Ball continuity and they kind of all bring it back together, but in a lot of cases, or ultimately it's kind of shaping up. And I recently did the manga chapter review for chapter 58. Me and Brandon did that last weekend. A lot of people there's been like a lot of things that remind me of Katsu no F. And to this point, it's been the way that they seemingly have set up Vegeta to be the guy to maybe get the win for once, rightfully so. And they're going to kind of pull it away from him. That's been sort of like the hot topic of discussion over the last couple of months of the manga, is like Vegeta finally.
You're not planning on spoiling me on this, are you?
No, I'm not. But what I am going to spoil for you is, and it's not a spoiler, so that's why I don't feel bad telling you, is I think Goku's going to be the guy to win. Spoiler alert. I'm very interested to hear what you'd have to say about the moral arc, definitely as just a manga. But like I said, the first 131 episodes of Dragon Ball Super are a rare instance. And I've talked about it fairly recently, but they're like a rare instance for Dragon Ball fandom as a whole, in that it truly was like a week to week ride, and riding by the seat of your pants kind of thing. Like, you really had no idea what could happen in the following week because there's no manga source material to back it up. I would say that the only time you could like maybe compare it to is when 64 episodes of Dragon Ball GT, where there was no source material, but it wasn't like we were watching it live in Japan in 96 and 97. Never mind in the age of social media where we're all really interconnected and talking about it constantly. I feel like that was really sort of the special thing for me watching Dragon Ball Super. Wasn't especially blown away by the stories or anything. Lots of retread and things we're all familiar with. But the community that involved around it, for better or for worse in a lot of ways too, was one of the more gratifying or interesting things of being part of this fandom in the last few years. When the series does return, or I guess this question doesn't really make much sense for you because you're not even caught up on the series as a whole in terms of the manga with this moral arc and the Galactic Prisoner control, or the Galactic Prisoner arc. You're not caught up with that. So I guess if the series were to return on like more of a broad view sort of level, what would you hope for if Dragon Ball were to return?
I would definitely hope for some forward progress. Let's get out of that 10-year gap. Let's move somewhere. That's really all that again, if it has to come back, I'd still rather it just not. But
sorry, it makes too much money.
I'd rather just stop. Well, stop. People stop buying things. I don't know.
You can't. You should see my bedroom around me, man. It's ridiculous how much Dragon Ball stuff I've got. It's embarrassing. I won't let you see it.
But if it has to keep going indefinitely until we're all dead, then yeah, I don't have a lot of expectations. I don't have a lot of this. It must be this way or it's not going to be good. But so I don't want to. I don't want to tie it down that much. I don't want to tie down my expectations too much so that I can't appreciate what is done. So, but just in the most generalized sense, it just needs to have some movement to it, and I feel that it's been lacking in that. I'm not going to say that's my guarantee fix for modern Dragon Ball. If they just do that, it'll all be fine, because it all ultimately comes down to the storytelling, in my opinion. But I definitely think it will benefit from not being stuck in this weird time warp we've been in for the past 7 years now.
So one thing that I think is interesting when you touch on Dragon Ball dissected TV versus manga is sometimes you point out like this portion of the television series, it goes as long as this piece of the manga. So I think it's something like the Frieza arc, from the time it's on TV, beginning to end. I forget. I think it's February 14th, 1991 to September 11th, 1992. I think those are the years.
It was 90 to 91.
90 to 91. All right, but I definitely got the dates right because it's Valentine's Day and September 11th. You can't screw those dates up. But in the same time, they do kind of, from the anime perspective, start to catch up to the story, and that's when so much of some of that, depends on how you look at it, nostalgic, great, annoying, frustrating filler comes in. Do you think that hitting pause on the anime series for Super and wanting to build up a buffer for the manga arc, do you think that plays into that decision? I would think that it has to, right?
In the past, I would, in classic Dragon Ball style, I would say yes, and that'd be a great idea. But this is just such a different production pipeline that it's like one doesn't necessarily depend on the other anymore. It's not as, one's not as dependent on the other anymore, because they all just sort of both come from the same place and branch out in their own direction. So we've seen, them do their own things. They've made their own versions of stories. So I while I would definitely agree in the terms of just being able to have a decent high quality production and not get, bogged down on a week to week basis, I would not mind Dragon Ball actually being a seasonal show. And for the record, Dragon Ball has never been a seasonal production. It's always been an ongoing production. There are no seasons of Dragon Ball in Japan.
What do you wait? There's not 9 seasons of Dragon Ball. What are these orange DVDs on my shelf telling me then?
Yeah, there weren't 9 seasons of Dragon Ball Z in America. Crying out loud, there were 6.
Wow.
Oh,
gosh, these people got it all fouled up. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think there's sort of a need, and I think that sort of, I don't know, I could be wrong, but I think that the storyboarding aspect, like, again, we've referenced AJ several times throughout this conversation. His analysis of what was going on week to week in Dragon Ball Super was interesting to me. Like, Dragon Ball Z back in the day, or Dragon Ball, had like an 8 or 9 week turn time to get an episode done, as where the turn time for Dragon Ball Super trended at around 6 weeks. And I wonder how much of it accounts for, or how much of it factored into, they don't have any, because in a lot of ways the manga functions as like as an early storyboarding process. So when not only do you not have any story ideas, but don't even have the visual piece of it mapped out in any way, shape, or form, that has to add a tremendous amount of additional time to your process. Never mind that you've already cut 2 or 3 weeks off of the process from what it used to be 20 years ago. So I feel like they have to make it something that's going to be sustainable. They have to have some sort of buffer with the Moro arc. And I hadn't realized this until we did our manga chapter review for 58 last weekend with Brandon. The Moro arc has gone on since December of 18. It's gone on for 16 months at this point. And I think you can look at a lot of those chapters and easily subdivide them into, for sake of plot beats or structure, act structure, whatever, like, you could probably chunk out most of those chapters into 2 to 3 episodes. 16 chapters, 2 to 3 episodes. let's say conservatively, that gives you like maybe 35 to 40 weeks of buffer time in terms of story to play around with. I think it's approaching. The return is approaching. I think we've had several people tell us that it should have already happened because they had some friends on some European licensing staffs or animation staffs or whatever. Obviously, that turned out to not have been the case, but I wonder if COVID, my guess initially was going to be it returns in the summer of 2020 when Goku was a mascot for the Tokyo Olympics, but due to COVID, that's obviously been postponed. That was my call for when the series returned. Do you have any guesses you want to make on this public conversation?
I can't say never.
I mean, you could wish never, but you know it's only a matter of time.
I don't know. I've honestly never given it a single moment's thought.
God damn it! How dare you undercut everything I've thought about for the last 2 years?
I'm not trying to undercut.
No, I'm totally kidding.
I'm glad you have. I'm glad you have thoughts on this. I don't know. I guess it'll happen when it happens. I don't know. I guess it's sad. I'm really kind of a boring person in that regard. Where it's like I don't tend to do a lot of speculation. I don't do the what ifs. And I was thinking this when you asked me about the Broly movie and what I thought when I found out that he was going to be the main villain. You know, as much as I sort of had a sort of eye-rolling, I guess, yeah, this is the way Super does things, I, at the same time, I didn't devote a lot of my thought processes to going, well, I wonder what they're going to do with this, and this, getting riled up about all that. Although I think I did a bit more maybe with Resurrection F, and that sort of bit me in the ass, because I really did latch on to that worst wish in history thing, and I thought of so many things you could do with that, and they didn't do anything interesting with it at all.
The worst wish in history is that Frieza comes back to Earth for a day, and then they kill him again.
Yeah, it's I've said it before, but it's not the worst wish in history. It's just a mildly inconvenient weekend.
Yep, at most.
It's also because I don't like to I don't like to impose my own expectations on things, because then you sort of set yourself up for disappointment, or up for nerd fan rage in unpleasant situations.
Story of my life.
So yeah, I always try to just sort of, it's like I wait till the thing is out, and then I just try to appreciate it for what it is. This is a little bit less so than that, because it's just a date. So, so I'm really kind of extrapolating here. But it's just like it'll come when it comes, and I don't typically find myself just sort of like biting my nails over, oh my god, when is this gonna happen? I just sort of put it to the back of my mind and focus on other things, and I don't really. It sounds flippant, but I just don't really care all that much. So it'll happen when it happens, and I'm trying to ignore it until then,
God, I envy your position. I see a new manga chapter drop on the 20th. I'm like, all right, when's the translation coming? Oh, nope, that's the French translation. Where's the English translation? Oh, okay, here's an English translation. I got to read it right away. And it only.
Yeah, I'm always behind on everything. I'm never like the first person to go see a movie. I find things like years after they become popular and come and gone. I always miss the hype. It's like, last year all my friends were watching Game of Thrones. Maybe I'll watch that 10 years from now. I don't know, but
I'm with you.
I'm always completely off the pulse. And it's like just like with Super. Like I said, I waited like 8 months before I even bothered to check it out, and I'm, supposed to be a huge Dragon Ball fan, but it's just, I just have a, hard time being current about things,
Yeah, no, July 5th, 2015. I only remember the date because A, it was the first episode of Dragon Ball Super, but B, because it's the day after the 4th of July, my favorite holiday, and that was a year where I opted to not get completely blackout hammered so I could go home early and set an alarm clock to wake up and find a sub of the first episode of Dragon Ball Super. I couldn't wait. I often have flashbacks to when I first started getting my first fan sub VHSs when I was a kid, and that feeling of like, ooh, there's some exclusivity to this, and I'm learning things that people in America might not be so hip to right now, and internet's obviously changed
I was so much happier before the simulcast happened. I hated when that happened.
Yeah.
I much preferred Dragon Team's subtitles to the official subtitles. I hate the official subtitles so damn much, and that just so it's again, it's like I really got to go back and watch, because who knows if I hate those later episodes, probably just because I couldn't stand the stupid subtitles and how much they annoyed me.
Well, Lance, we have spent a considerable amount of time together tonight. I so appreciate all the extra time you've taken. I don't think either of us anticipated it would have taken this much time today, but in terms of goals for 2020 or plans for content on MistareFusion, whether that be Dragon Ball specific or any of your other content specific, what do those goals and aspirations look like?
Dragon Ball Dissection is mostly just to stay the course as best I can. I have a lot of just trying to make the Buu Arc the best that I possibly can, and try to keep a consistent release schedule. I do have a lot of things in the works, but that's still kind of classified right now. I want to make a big announcement when it becomes. You'll see in the next couple of months. But I do have a new project I'm working on right now, because I've had plenty of extra time now that I don't have a job anymore. So I've sort of gone back. I've gone back to the well a little bit myself, because this is the 10th anniversary of my my Power Rangers Super Sentai videos, which were relegated to the 10-minute YouTube time limit that existed back then, and we didn't have much. I didn't have much good equipment, and the source material wasn't that great, so I was gonna try to do another Zyuranger to Power Rangers comparison analysis. Not the same thing I did before, but much more in depth. I've actually written a script for the first episode of each series, which is as long as any of my individual videos were, and doing it with a much higher production value, and really sort of comparing how each one uses its narrative and characters, and how, because I don't really consider myself a Power Rangers fan anymore, and I haven't really been in over 20 years, but the whole concept of adaptation fascinates me, and how that can be used to tell stories. So I thought it'd be fun to sort of like line up the episodes side by side, and ultimately judge them, and which one turns out better in that sense. So I'm gonna try that out and see if people like it, and if so, it might become a series on its own, and I might be able to do the entire series that way. I don't know.
That would be an awesome way to kind of because honestly, I never realized what it was when I was a kid. When the first Mighty Morphin series hit, I was in kindergarten, first grade. So like the idea of them importing and recutting all that footage was, nowhere even near my radar. But as I learned about it as an adult, I'm like, oh, that's an interesting way to kind of produce the series, and how the business aspect part of it works, and securing the rights, and what you can and can't cut in or refilm or restructure. That's all been very interesting to me. So I think that would make it for an interesting series on a very iconic series, especially for people who not only listen to this podcast, but people who are viewers of your channel, people who are fans of Dragon Ball in general. So I say you do it.
No, I'm really excited. I like the first script turned out really well, and I still, I still really like the videos I put out 10 years ago. But it was much more of a broad strokes kind of overview type of thing, and I really think there's a lot of material to be mined in the specificity that I really didn't get to look at before.
Yeah, so much of your own style has developed, obviously, over the last 10 years. You want to go back and give it the MistareFusion treatment, and not just Lance from 10 years ago starting to make his first YouTube channel and kind of going through the bumps, trials, and tribulations of such a thing.
Yeah, basically.
That's awesome, man. Well, I can't wait to take a look at the Zyuranger series, and obviously get the continued Dragon Ball Dissection series. Where can people, I mean, obviously youtube.com/MistareFusion. Is that the tag handle there, or?
Yep, MistareFusion. Same thing on Facebook and on Twitter at MistareFusion, or facebook.com/MistareFusion. And then, of course, if you are able, especially in these terrible times, if you find my content and like it, I also have a Patreon at patreon.com/MistareFusion as well, if you want to support the channel. And I think that pretty much covers it all.
And I'm about to go sign up for that Patreon channel. I don't support anybody on Patreon except soon to be you.
That's very kind. Thank you.
No, seriously. I feel like I make okay content for what I do. Like, and this isn't anything that I ever expected to do more than, for a few podcast episodes, but I can tell how much time and effort and love and research you put into it. You're very much worthy of it. I suggest you go support him on Patreon as well. If you want to hear an uncut version of this discussion, please check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/Dragon Ball Super Dope. I so appreciate the I think we were probably calling for about an hour, but we're coming up on 2.5 hours now, Lance. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. You are truly one of my favorite Dragon Ball content creators. Getting to pick your brain on this stuff has been a real treat tonight. And I look forward to seeing the next video, man.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. I really had a great time.
Super dope. Da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. MistareFusion was just on my show.